So, I am here doing another Mandalorian discussion show, and I'm joined with two more guests, two fantastic individuals who I've done podcasts with before, and I've done Star Wars podcasts with before, but not together, introducing people across the podmosphere in the name of Star Wars. So I'm here with Ike of Ike's Flame. Ike, how are you doing, good sir? Please tell people a little bit about the media you put out to do with the content that you put out.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, super excited to be here. Super excited when Mike reached out. Always love to find others to talk Star Wars about. So I've own podcast, Ike's Flame, and we do Star Wars content and Star Wars deep dives on characters and spend a whole 50 minutes talking about one character, and sometimes obscure characters. But so we do some of that, and we've also dived into High Republic stuff as well, which I know me and Mike have bonded over a lot, enjoying that. And so, so we just do a lot of Star Wars content each week and enjoy that. So so you guys can check us out on anywhere you guys listen to podcasts. But yeah, Ike's Flame and more Star Wars stuff if you love Star Wars, which is probably why you'd be here anyways.
Brilliant. I'll put links in the description. At the end, I'll let everyone plug as well, to make sure. But I wanted people to, especially you, Ike, because in these weekly discussion shows, this is, I think, your first time on, so it's really cool. Mm-hmm. Whereas this next guest, Spider Dan, introduce yourself, good sir, but you've been on two of these discussion shows before, in fact.
Been on them all of them.
Well, one of them I think you were meant to be on mine, but then you didn't. And you're on someone else's. So what do you tell people about
controversy, Some controversy there. I made too many promises. I can't keep them all. I want to make everybody happy, but it's not possible to do that. I'm Spider Dan. I've been discussing Star Wars now as long as Mike's wanted to talk to me, so whenever that was. We talked about the Book of Boba Fett quite extensively. I was on quite a few of those, I remember. I even helped out Mike when him and his co-host Jack couldn't do one of the Andor episodes. I stood in, not as well as either of them, but it was fine.
You did a good job. You did a good job.
Right. It was all right. I've done a lot of Star Wars content myself on my podcast, Spider Dan The Secret Wars. We've looked at maybe the lesser respected or appreciated Star Wars
very funny episodes to listen to. the Star Wars holiday special and the Ewok movies with Angry Andy.
We did. That's what I like to call the trilogy of terrible. I've been on quite a few of the Attention Seeking Geeks YouTube channel. He does a lot of Star Wars content as well, and I've been on there. And Mike and him had to fight over me. I lost, pulled in all these different directions. I said I'd happily be on all of these episodes afterwards to make up for it. But Mike was like, no. I only wanted you on the one. I was like, all right, cheers. Fine, whatever.
High demand.
Yes, very, very high demand. I'm very. I have to say, I loved Andor. I thought Andor was incredible. But I will say it is nice to be back in this corner of the Star Wars universe.
Kind of easy, almost easier watching in a lot of ways. It's one of those things where with anyone else who's been checking out, because all the guests so far have been different, which is something I've not. With Andor, it was quite difficult because that went on for so many weeks, But with this one, it's I've had a different set of guests each time, and I'm still planning on doing that as well. So that's the general goal, because this time, as much as I love talking to people about these shows, one thing I found with the Andor discussions was there was occasion times where people repeat themselves, which is fine, because I asked generally the same kind of question for certain episodes. But with Andor, especially when it was in arcs, it was like, well, I spoke to you last week, and this episode is basically the same as last week, because next week's when it finishes. So we're all just kind of saying, this is amazing and great in Andor, but I can't wait for next week. Yeah. So it was like, I really wanted to make a specific effort, especially connecting with people like Ike and other people I haven't had as much time to speak with about Star Wars as I would like, because if it was up to me, as I'm sure if it was up to you two, you wouldn't have day jobs. You would just kind of spend literally 8 to 10 hours a day podcasting and talking about nerdy stuff, and just be able to have get enough money from sponsors and Patreons and stuff just to live and be able to do this, and then you could spend
OnlyFans, whatever pays the bills.
You want to see my weird feet? Let's do it.
I got weird everything, Mike. Inside and out, it's all weird.
Apart from your voice. Apart from your voice is pretty good for podcasting. But your weirdness of your podcast is actually one of the better things about it. So it's one of the appealing things. One thing I say to people about Spider Dan's podcast is, as much like I love your podcast as well. It's fantastic, especially if you want to deep dive into, as you say, certain characters. I was like, I want to know a bit more about Thrawn, and you just delve in. It's fantastic. So I will sing your praises there. But with Spider Dan, one thing I love about his podcast is because he focuses a lot of the time on really weird and obscure movies. They're the kind of movies that not only have you not seen, you've never heard of. So it's not one of those things like there's certain movie podcasts I like. Some of our friends do them, and it's like they tackle a lot of these movies, and you're like, I want to listen to that, but I'm going to watch that movie at some point, so I can't. I need to wait until sometimes I'll watch a movie that everyone has seen. You know, I've been like The Crow. I hadn't seen The Crow until like a couple months back, and then when I did, I was like, oh, I can finally listen to that podcast. And 3 different people were like, well, there's this podcast and there's this podcast because everyone's spoken about it. With Spider Dan, it's like, here's a film you've never heard of ever, and so you're probably never going to watch it, and it's like brilliant. So I can just listen to you talk about it and don't have to bother.
And nobody else is ever going to cover it as well. So
some of those ones are very off the wall.
It doesn't matter what you say, right? Nobody can correct you or
no, because I can make up whatever I want. I can be like, yeah, he was married to the Queen of Estonia, this actor.
Well, one of them you were adding to the IMDb pages, weren't you? Because there was barely any trivia.
Yeah, I can't remember. I was thinking about that the other day. I can't remember which one it was, but I was like, this is annoying for me because this is usually my like.
Terrifier 2, was it?
Yes, you are correct. Terrifier 2, because I watched it because it only just come out quite recently, and yes, it was Terrifier in fact because I hadn't seen Terrifier 2, but the Terrifier 2 had just come out, and then I'd watched a load of panels about the actor and the director talking about it, and I was like, this is all really good shit. It's nowhere to be found otherwise. You could be like me, watch an hour or 40 minutes of this panel, or could I just write that on and just go and add it? And I was like, yeah, I'm just going to add it. So there we go.
Yeah, so anyone who goes to IMDb of Terrifier, a lot of it is Spider Dan who's added to it. So if they're wrong, it's him. It's him. He's secretly put, oh yeah, Spider Dan the Secret Boss. He was in a cameo in this film. He's in the background. So
he's tremendously well endowed for some reason. It's got nothing to do with the film, but that's what it's here for. Yes,
he has the sexiest shoulder blade of all people. Just the one, but the other one is gruesome.
It's disturbing. Yes, but yes, that's my podcast in a nutshell. But like your podcast sounds right up my street because I do like a good obscure character with a unique and large backstory. So I will be subscribing, as I'm sure everyone else will now.
Everyone else should. It's glad to hear. It's a great time, especially if you like my podcast where I do deep diving into comics and the little sort of basically. If your favorite part of my podcast is the bit where I go on a tangent about a random character, that's what Ike's show is. So if you like those little tangents about characters, he magnifies that greatly. And because you and I both, Ike, we consume a lot of the written content as well of Star Wars, it means that especially with the books, there's so much character depth in so many of the books.
Yeah.
So with Mandalorian, we'll get into it. So Ike, what I've been doing in these other episodes is I like to get people's general gist of how the live action shows have been doing. Now I know obviously you came on my podcast, I came on yours, and it was really great. But just in case people haven't checked those out, I'll put links in the description and stuff.
Yeah.
How have you been finding the live action shows? Obviously you've got Andor and Kenobi, Book of Boba Fett, Mandalorian. How have you been finding them all in general? And from that question as well, were you excited for Mando Series 3?
Yeah, I really like them. I think it's been a nice change of pace from like animated, and I've loved to be able to get to see. It's been fun to see which I'm assuming we might talk about this later.
There's spoilers, so yeah, you can say whatever you want.
But characters that we saw in animated that now we're seeing in live action, and so I think that's been really cool to see as well. Those characters brought to life a little more, and getting to see more of their stories. So like I've loved that aspect of live action and with Star Wars. And I think also it's brought a little more, especially with like the Kenobi show and Andor and Mando, like I think it's really brought more of like a Star Wars movie feel to our homes. In the sense of like we get to watch this and like it definitely has a movie type feel to it that we haven't had that opportunity to really get with Star Wars until like live action, which I've really enjoyed as well. When it comes to Mando season 3, I'm super pumped. Still am super pumped. I'm still very intrigued where all they're going, but like I will say I think season 3 I was most excited for, just because, and we are getting into some of this. Like I love kind of like we talked about. I love diving into like deep dives and lore and all that, and so like the fact that we're diving into some more in-depth Mandalorian lore, for me is super fun. And we're starting to see some of that, and I'm super intrigued to see where all this goes, with the dark saber, with the is it Mythosaurus, or yeah, however you say that, as well, and all of those things, like where are they going, and the fact that like I was super excited when we got to return to Mandalore. And even though it's like wrecked and a mess, like we still see the civic center and all that. So that's been super exciting for me just to see those and be able to dive into that. And I'm super excited to see where all this is leading and where they're going to go.
Amazing. Yeah. And then, Dan, same to you as well. And how you've been, well, actually, no, I'll ask how you've been watching them in a moment, because we'll talk about, I'll ask you, and then we'll go back to Ike for how you think the season's been so far. But just you as a recap of all the live action Star Wars stuff, because you aren't as much of a super fan as we are, but obviously you're still a Star Wars fan. So please inform us.
So for Book of Boba Fett that we did on the podcast, I surprised you because I said I hadn't seen any of it. And we'd booked it in, and I was like, oh shit, I've got no time. So I literally just stayed up very late, and I watched, I think within the space of a week, I watched the entire 2 seasons of The Mandalorian. And what a ride. What a ride. Great fun. Everything I would have wanted. The main reason I avoided it was all the, oh, Baby Yoda, Baby Yoda. And I was like, fuck him. I was like, just all over the show. And it's like, and there was a lot of spoilers and stuff. And I was like, it kind of, sometimes spoilers, don't put me off. Sometimes they do. Sometimes if it's just in my face. And it was very much in my face. And that's all I thought it was. It was just about this green Baby Yoda thing. And I was just like, I don't know if I'm that interested, but actually, once I actually watched it and got the context of the show, and it's this kind of lone wolf and cub style thing, I was fully on board with the kind of Western aesthetic, the samurai aesthetic, the fantasy, the sci-fi, all mixing together in this lovely gumbo pot of Star Wars brilliance. I thought it was really fun. We talked about Book of Boba Fett, not my favorite. There was a few episodes of that were just The Mandalorian, which
and they were the best ones.
And they were the best ones. We discussed it. And I would not be surprised, because I know there was a joke going around that people watching Mandalorian season 3 wondering why Baby Yoda is back, Grogu's back with The Mandalorian, and that literally happened. I was like, people were like, what the fuck? Like they completely missed it because they didn't watch those 2 or 3 episodes of Boba Fett. And I wouldn't be surprised if they repackaged those episodes as like Mandalorian season 3, the prologue, or something like that, or call it some other thing. And I wouldn't blame them, to be honest. But I have to say, like, Andor absolutely blew me away. Like, absolutely, I was like, I think we said it on the show. It was just an incredible show, incredible acting, tightly written, paced, structured, edge of your seat kind of thrilling TV show, like up there with the best that TV has to offer for me. And I'm not a big TV show watcher, but for me, I was just almost every episode just blown away. I thought, this is amazing. What it's saying is amazing. The adventures, the heists, the prison breaks, just all of it. Just like I could, and I don't know if they do that again. Maybe if you did do the show again, maybe you would do it in the arcs. If they were going to do an arc, you think maybe you could break up the podcast that way or something. I'm not sure, but an idea if they're going to do it that way, if they're going to tell the story that way, maybe that's an idea. But but I was very much on board. The first episode in, hear those musical cues, the I was like, yeah, I'm back. I'm here. I'm here for it. I'm ready. Give me what I want. And that first episode, bam, off to the races. Very happy. Second episode, there's another episode, but it's it's there.
Well, tell us how you watch them then, because you didn't watch them like me. Me and Ike, I assume you were like watching them weekly, like most Star Wars fans. Dan didn't do that.
I didn't do that. I thought it's only tradition that I binge again the Star Wars shows. I did do it for Andor actually, or did I do it for Andor? No, I think I did that again. I think I binged it again because it was like, oh, you're going to be on this podcast. I was like, oh yeah, I better watch it all quick.
It's like a kid who hasn't handed in their homework, and it's like the night before. It's like, oh no,
pretty much like stay up late to do it. It'll be good. But yeah, it was great. But yeah, I watched 2 episodes, then another 2 episodes, and then this one last night. And yeah, I've for the most part enjoyed what we've seen, what we've had, the characters we've been reintroduced to. For me, like. I've not watched Rebels yet, Mike. I know you think it's the best Star Wars content that ever has been made thus far. I've not watched it yet, but I'm going to. And also, I want to take in the Bad Batch as well because I really liked those characters. But I did watch the Clone Wars. I watched that show. And the moment that show got good for me is when they went to Mandalore and they started exploring the Mandalorian culture, the planet. Is it? I want to say Satine. Is that? Yeah. Satine's there, and her relationship with Obi-Wan, and just everything to do. So every time they went back to Mandalore, it was a Mandalore-related thing. I was like, yep, this is what I'm here for. So the fact that they are going back to Mandalore and there's stuff going on there, and there's a bit more of the culture and this kind of again, it's like the Death Watch and stuff that was in that show as well. I like that they're exploring that and. Again, like I'm not, you know me, Mike. I'm not a religious zealot, but I think even I'm like, yeah, I could get behind this religion. Yeah. I could, I get it. I understand. I grasp it, and I go, yeah, I can see why they would want to believe that or think that or, live by this code. So yeah, and there are some stuff. There is some stuff in this episode I'm not entirely happy with, but we'll get into that, I'm sure. But on the whole, really enjoying it. It's fun to be back.
Amazing. And I will just say with the comments on Mandalorian, as in the Mandalorian culture, yeah, people who are listening, Clone Wars has some incredible Mandalorian stuff, and I agree with you, Dan. I think once Mandalorian stuff comes into it, and then that eventually bleeds in with the Darth Maul stuff, that is, to me, top tier Star Wars. The finale of the Clone Wars Season 7 is some of the best Star Wars, period. But Rebels delves deeper, maybe deeper, than the Clone Wars does into Mandalorian culture, because this isn't a spoiler. And also our friends who are really specific about spoilers, they've seen Rebels because, they're great. But Bo-Katan is very heavily in, like, a huge part of her journey. All the stuff that we see that's going on in Mandalorian right now, like, when did she have the Darksaber? How does she get it? Blah, blah, blah. That's all in Rebels. It's all explained and in depth, because from episode 1, you notice of Rebels, one of the main characters is wearing Mandalorian armor, but they don't mention it for quite a while. And why is that? And it all connects together with the Purge and everything we see in this series. So good shout there, Dan, pointing that out. So Ike, with yourself, how have you found up to this episode, the sort of the first half of season 3 of Mandalorian? Have you been enjoying it a lot more than the prior 2 seasons? Do you think it's on par? How have you felt up to this episode of the series so far?
Yeah, I think it's been on par. I would say I feel like a couple episodes were a little slow for me. Like the Foundling, like episode 4 was like I get the purpose of it, but it was a little slow. And I love the Order 66 scene. As we get another one of those, but like it's been on par. I think the biggest thing I've been super intrigued about is Bo-Katan. Like Bo-Katan has like extremely intrigued me in this series, because even from the first point we saw her in episode 1, I was kind of taken aback by how upset she was, how distant or like upset she was even was at Din Djarin. And so I think like that for me, I was expecting, because they'd work together, they seem to work together pretty well, and obviously there's that tension with the Darksaber and Din having it and all that, but I was still just surprised like how much tension there was there. So it's been really intriguing to see kind of that arc of like, where is Bo-Katan going with this? And then when we get Bo-Katan technically joining the Watch, which is, that was like, oh, what just happened? Like the end of that episode, I'm like, what did I just watch? Because that was like the last thing I would have ever expected. And so like how they brought all this together. So it's very intriguing, and I think it's setting up for a really good back half of season 3. And so I think Bo-Katan's been a super intriguing to me, and just how they've painted her story, how they've laid her story arc out in that sense as well. I think the other thing that's intrigued me, and I'm very, very interested, and I think one line, I think it was episode 2, when they're on Mandalore and Din's trying to get to the waters and all that, but when Baby Yoda or Grogu and Bo-Katan are going back together after Din's kind of captured there by that spider droid thing, and Bo-Katan says something along the lines of to Grogu, like, "Hey, our people used to work together, or our people, like, I know that," and like, but then there's also a history, especially if you get into like Legends, like, you know, Old Republic, like there's tension between Jedi and Mandalorians, and like supposedly, like, I mean, with the dark saber, you have like that whole history of like the one Mandalorian Jedi and all this, and so I think like I'm very intrigued to see how Grogu fits into all this, in the sense of like, and they seem to accept him so far, but like, is there any tension from Mandalorians about having a Force user in their midst? Because we've obviously seen him use the Force and that sort of thing. And like, when in this last episode, when Grogu got Beskar armor for their outside of the chainmail, like that Din initially gave him, like that intrigued me as well. I was like, okay, where's this going with that? Because I think that mix of Jedi and Mandalore is very interesting, and it has a very interesting history. And so I think that's been a very intriguing part for me, and to see where that goes. And especially when you have a character like Bo-Katan, who has relationships with Maul and Ahsoka and other Jedi, and with Duchess Satine being her sister with Obi-Wan, like she's worked with a lot of Jedi, and so she knows Jedi pretty well as well, and with the history. So I think all that is it's just interesting to see how all that's playing together so far.
Very good points there. Very good points. And it's something that I'd only really just thought about, is linking more with what you said, is that a lot of people may not know this. It's like a throwaway line in either Clone Wars or Rebels, but the Mandalorian armor and their weapons is specifically, it was initially designed to fight Force users. Because in Legends, there were the Mandalorian Wars, and I've been getting into Legends a bit more recently, but it was like thousands and thousands of years before the Skywalker Saga, the Mandalorians would fight the Jedi. And it was a huge war that went on for a very, very long period of time. So like, a lot of Mandalorian armor like Beskar can combat weapons and armor, can combat and are resistant to lightsabers. A lot of the jetpacks getting away. Flamethrowers are one of Force users' weaknesses, because you can hold back a degree of flame, but if you're surrounded by that, you can't. You can be the greatest swordsman in the world and deflect all these blaster bolts coming at you. Very few Force users could be able to surround themselves with like a shield against flamethrowers coming. Plus, you know, you see it a bit in the Clone Wars and things when bounty hunters go after certain Jedi, or when there is fighting with the Mandalorians, like the wrist, like, I don't know what to call it, like a lasso, like the harpoon gun thing. You shoot at your wrist and ties people up. Like, that is real. When you're a Jedi and you're stuck like this, you can't get out of it. So it's like there's all these elements. And I think one thing that all the people who are now making Star Wars, who like Jon Favreau and Dave Filoni, but also the High Republic authors as well, all of them grew up reading Legends books or comics or those sorts of things. So one of the big critiques of the new canon is people saying, oh, it's throwing away Legends, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, no, they're rebuilding something, and they're using elements from Legends, and we're getting people who've grown up consuming Legends, and they're feeding elements they enjoyed into aspects of the canon. So I really, really enjoy that. And I think both of your insights there are really interesting, with the religious connotations and Mandalore and the Force. So we'll delve into this episode, and I enjoyed this episode. Like, I've enjoyed all the episodes of Mandalorian. I think they've all been great. I think my least favorite is probably the one with Elia Kane and Dr. Pershing. I didn't think that was a bad episode. I thought it was interesting, and I really like the lore, and I love the whole ex-Imperial stuff. And obviously, we can see that that's probably going to be the seeds that are feeding into what happened with the First Order. And obviously, Elia is in this episode as well, and that episode I did enjoy, but it felt quite, you know, here's part 1, here's the middle bit, here's part 2. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. And this episode felt a little bit like that. I feel like this is almost like an episode and a half kind of pushed together. And although I did enjoy it and it was full to the brim of stuff, I did have a little bit of issue with it, because, you know, the big bad being Gorian Shard, I was like, oh, that was quite easy. It was like there's the YouTube channel Pitch Meetings, and it's like the catchphrase is, it's super easy, barely an inconvenience. That's kind of what it felt like. It was like, oh no, this big bad. Oh, he's gone. Don't worry about it. It's like the design of him was so cool, and he was such an interesting thing. I thought he was going to be like maybe a constant big bad. No, he's just in this one episode and he's gone. And I was like, oh, anything else? No, one of his henchmen kind of bailed, and that's about it. He's fine. It's like, oh, okay. So we'll dot around everywhere because this episode's got a lot of bits and pieces across. But with like, if we just start as a drop-off point, the pirates obviously attacking Nevarro, and the Pirate King Gorian Shard, I love the design of that guy. I thought it was really, really interesting. So, Dan, what did you think of the Pirate King and himself and the whole stuff with Nevarro? Like, what were your kind of thoughts on those elements?
I thought it was interesting to see Greef Karga in. I love that he's got all these robes and he's like, I'm high, all this. But I loved in that previous episode where he's like, I can still fucking shoot you. And I appreciated the line where he's like, oh, they shot first. I was like, see what you've done there. I love the design of the character. I think he's great. It's very interesting. It's kind of very old school. Like I think it looks like a practical effect to me. It looks like a costume or a puppet of some kind. He does come across like that kind of classic pirate, and I like the way I like it when they do pirate stuff in sci-fi, but they add so many of the kind of pirate elements. Like the way the ship moves is very like as it pivots. In space, it feels like a galleon or something as it turns and moves, which I really appreciated. And I liked that that Greef Karga is clearly like he sees through. He's like, you can't bluff you out of this one. I know you. There's no way. There's nothing you've got. You've got no protection. Nobody's coming to help you. You want nothing to do with the New Republic, who are looking very awful in this. Like they are not painted in a great light. They're like we're just a new empire. Fuck off. We're not helping you. Which is probably what that character who is kind of undermining everything is kind of doing. I can't remember her name, but it was fun. It's very kind of cartoony, like but it's in a good way. It's not like I'm not like it's not something I didn't enjoy because it's fun, and that's what I feel about this season. There's a sense of fun to it. Like obviously there's some serious stuff and some intense or scary moments and things, but I think it just feels fun, and I felt this episode was for the most part quite fun, very serious. Obviously there's I thought the whole sequence of them, Nevarro being shot and destroyed, and it's quite interesting to see how far Nevarro's come from those first few episodes, which is just like this kind of backwater planet with it's Tatooine stand-in, if you will, but it feels like its own planet, its own place. It's got its own just ecosystem. It is a completely different world and place, and it's really kind of come around, and I like that. Greef he actually cares about these people. He cares about these, all of them are being shot, and he's trying to convince them. He's like, we'll be safe, help is coming. He's not necessarily the character we met at the beginning of season one, and I like that. I like that he has developed, he's changed, and he's like, yeah, be a lawman. Let's give you a tract of land. Let's put you get to put down roots. I'll put down roots here. You can do this, and that's one of the more interesting things about this episode: the idea that the Mandalorians can have a place called home, and I like that aspect of it a lot. But yeah, I dug it. It's who doesn't love pirates? End of the day, who doesn't like? If you can't like, pirates are fun. It's fun, and yeah, it was for me. I was like, space pirates. Episode's called The Pirate. It's gonna be about pirates, but I have to say, my favorite character in the entire episode is a character. I don't know his name, but I'm going to call him Ugnaught Smee. Is the right hand man of Gorian Shard, and he's basically Smee to his Captain Hook, and he even looks like Smee. He's got the stripes, he's got the classic kind of.
I didn't think that, but now you've said it. It's
yeah,
Ugnaught Smee. It's Ugnaught Smee, and yeah, I he was my favorite character in the whole thing because I was just like, they know exactly what they've done there. Disney know what they're doing there. But yeah, that was fun for me. But yeah, on the whole, I thought the idea, the threat, and the peril of it, and it happening to this planet that has grown and developed, as well as Greef Karga's relationship to it and the other characters, and we get a brief mention of Gina Carano's character who's no longer here. Oh no,
she's not busy. Oh no.
She's gone. Bye.
She's not dead though, so if maybe she'll come back. But at the moment, no, she's really, really, really busy.
Yeah, really busy, so busy. You won't ever see her again. But no, I think this episode has been fun. It was again, it's off to the races. They didn't mess around. They're like, big pirate ship shooting Nevarro, go, and we're off.
Yeah, Ike, your sort of thoughts on all that sort of general jazz, and anything else you want to add?
Yeah, I totally agree, and I think part of the reason I love this episode is I think they left a lot of loose ends. Obviously we get the ending with the shuttle and all that with the Mandalorian piece of armor in there. But we get a lot of loose ends because I think also like when we look at the pirate, honestly, I was a little disappointed because when the episode was named The Pirate, I was like, are we getting Hondo?
That's what I said to Megan.
That was my first thought. I was like, Hondo?
That's what I said.
But it didn't happen. But which is okay. But that was my first thought. And I was like, I was a little disappointed at the end of the episode, but that's okay. But I think they left a lot of loose ends. And I think like with the pirate ship and all that, it like where, because my question is, where does this pirate ship come from? Do they like, obviously they're a small group, like are they answering to someone else? And I think this goes back to like, I think all throughout this episode or even season, we've got a lot of loose ends, like in the sense of, because I go back to like this hasn't been brought up yet, but we got the first appearance of Zeb from Rebels and a lot of action, and Zeb did like nothing. He like sat at the bar and told him, hey, good luck. Like that was all he did. I was like, is that all we're gonna get? Like I feel like we have to get more, or Zeb is a link to seeing other characters from that, something along that line. And I think you even go back to like episode 1, we got Purgil in hyperspace, and they've not touched that. So like, where is all this going? Is my question. Like, who? Like, there has to be something behind. I think this. I guess that's where my brain goes. With like, we see Zeb, we see the Purgil in episode 1. We get this somewhat seemingly random pirate attack on Nevarro, which I feel like can't be isn't not so random. Once we know,
you're starting to sound like that rebel pilot.
Yeah,
all connected. It can't be a coincidence.
I feel like it has to be. I mean, maybe it's just me, but I feel like there has to be some connections here. And like, I even go back because they've pulled a handful of things from Legends that you mentioned, and I think just even like, are we gonna start to see some? Which I hope. I mean, even something like a Thrawn type of a thing come in from like he's the connection to the pirates and that sort of thing. Are we going to see some sort of cloning even stuff come from the outer like outside? Because I think the other significant thing I think about as well is like Nevarro is an outer rim, and so are we getting some of these like some of the cloning stuff that we see in the sequel trilogy, and some of like Thrawn stuff we know is from like in the beyond regions. Like, are we gonna see some of that come into Mando and some of how all this plays out? I don't know. And I'm just throwing some stuff out there, and I'm open to ideas. But like I feel like there has to be some connection and some things in there, because I feel like you can't just throw Purgils in and be like, "Hey, that was cool," when we all know there's another connection to that, or Zeb as well. And like, as cool as it is, like they Dave Filoni and them, they know what they're doing. Obviously they're putting things together, and so I'm just excited from this episode. I was excited to see as many loose ends as we saw, knowing that they're going to weave all those back together, in probably a pretty cool way.
Very good points there. Yeah, it was one of those things that when I've, as much as I love Star Wars and The Mandalorian, I've raised some critiques about it. And one of the predictions I had when I was speaking with Ben and Andy, who are a lot more pessimistic about Mandalorian than I am, was I went on a little rant.
Just in general, Mike. Just in general.
They are, yeah. Ben's more middle. Ben's kind of neutral-ish, with certain things he's on cloud nine, and other things he's like, yeah, that's terrible. He hasn't even continued watching Mandalorian. He disliked it that much. Wow. He's just like, I've just given up for the time being. And I was like, I don't know what show you're watching, but fair enough, you do you. He's not like a canon hater, because he adores Andor, Bad Batch, Rebels, Clone Wars, so he's entitled to his opinion, and Mandalorian isn't the greatest show ever. But one thing when I was talking to them was, I went a little rant at the end of the episode, and I was like, what I don't want this to be is a show that isn't its own, it doesn't have its own identity. I didn't want the show just to be like, right, so Mandalorian everyone's watching, so let's use that to jump on the spin-offs, this is going to jump off to Book of Boba Fett, this is going to jump off to Ahsoka, this is going to jump off to this show and this show. And I was like, as much as I like connected universes like the MCU are doing, I like it where you can watch a Marvel film, and if it's a titular character and not an Avengers movie, you don't have to have seen anything else. There'll be odd little nod, odd little thing here and there, but you don't have to see everything. But if you do watch everything, and then you watch the Avengers movie, then all the loose ends connect together. And that is what I think we're going to get, but I just don't want them to be too heavy-handed with it. But with this episode in particular, and the way they were kind of going with the Waters of Mandalore thing and the Mythosaur and that sort of stuff, we are really getting into, I think, the thing that everyone kind of... When you first heard the term The Mandalorian as a show, when this show was first announced, I think everyone just kind of snapped to either Legends or Clone Wars or Rebels and being like, oh, we're going to get loads of stuff about the Mandalorian culture. And then, although I did enjoy season 1 and 2 of Mandalorian, there was very little bits about Mandalorian culture. It was like, oh, we never take our helmets off. And we're like, really? We haven't heard that before? And they're like, yeah, let's just not talk about that for 7 more episodes. And you're like, what's happening? And it was like, oh, Hero's a monster of a week. Oh, and he crashes on this planet. And there's giant spider things. And Grogu's cute. And it was a bit like, okay, when are we going to... You've introduced the characters. We can see what he's capable of. Where are we going to get into the depth of it? And I think the finale of Series 2 definitely did that. And some of the Mandalorian episodes and Book of Boba Fett did it a bit. But this episode, the pirate stuff was really fun. I agree with both of you there. And I thought it was cool. But yeah, the depth of what it is to be Mandalorian, I think that's the thing that's really drawing me. I like the Star Wars action, but my favourite Star Wars action is with lightsabers. And although the darksaber's cool and stuff, it's like, it's all cool action, but like, if you're going to do action for me, perfect thing is lightsaber stuff. If I'm not going to get that, which is fine, I need there to be other weight behind it. And obviously had incredible writing, connection to characters, seeing what the Empire has actually done to the everyday people. What this show is doing is being like, okay, what happened after the Empire? How did the First Order come about? Because that was a big question. Everyone was like, oh, so we've got the sequel trilogy all of a sudden, and there's basically the identical Empire, and they've just rose up 30 years later, and there's no real mention of it anywhere. And there's a book called Bloodline by Claudia Gray that's really cool, but that only touches on it a little bit, because she could only tell so much because they hadn't developed everything. So it's like, with this, we're getting both the simultaneous thing of the rise of the First Order and how the New Republic became complacent in that, while simultaneously we're getting the Mandalorian culture and how there are different sects, and how we're going to obviously get some episode where it's going to really show what truly happened to Mandalore, because from seeing Rebels, you get hints, and then from here you get hints, but we're kind of... It's almost like you've got these things coming in from the other side. Rebels is like the prologue to it, and then Mandalorian is like the epilogue, but we're actually missing the core of the story of what happened with Bo-Katan. How did all this stuff with the Empire happen with Mandalore? And so, especially the way this episode ended, where you were saying, Ike, where it's like, oh my god, I didn't expect Bo-Katan to kind of almost accidentally join the Children of the Watch. And then at the end of this episode, it's that thing with the armorer, and it's like, oh, she's going to walk 2 worlds. So delving into that angle, I do want to talk about the New Republic and stuff as well. But that angle in particular, when I spoke with gentleman Thomas last week, he said he got bad vibes about the armorer. And I think Megan has said something similar to that as well. I want to know what you two think about that. If I start with you first, Ike, with the Armorer and the end of this episode with Bo-Katan and a helmet, what are your kind of thoughts on it? Do you believe what the Armorer's saying? Do you think she's truthful? What do you kind of feel about that?
Yeah, I think the Armor, and actually I just heard somebody else mention this just this last week, was like, they said, like, hey, I think the Armor is hiding something, or knows more than what she's leading on. They're like they even mentioned like, did the armorer know that they could go back to Mandalore, but she's just leading on that they can't. And like, I definitely think the armorer has something that, and also like maybe it's just me. I almost want to hear your guys' thoughts on this as well. But I almost get the impression that the armorer and Bo-Katan have some sort of history. Just because even like when they've had interactions, I feel like they've had very short interactions, and it's like, hey, I know you, or like, there's a sense of, I think also there's a sense that I feel like, or at least the understanding that, the armorer knows about Bo-Katan well enough to know that she wasn't a fan of the watch. She initially left the watch and all that, and so I think like there's something going on there, and I think the fact that we got this abandoned Lambda class shuttle and all that, that essentially now we think Moff Gideon's missing, and all that with the Beskar piece in there is like, okay, is like the armor know what's going on there? Is there something linked to that? So I definitely feel like the armor is up to something. Good or bad, I'm not 100% sure. But she is. I think that also goes like the fact that now Bo-Katan's like, it seemed okay. Like when the armor came out and said, "Hey, Bo-Katan's gonna walk these two ways now," like everyone else was okay with it. Like they were like, I was kind of like, she walked out with her helmet off and nobody freaked out, nobody shot at her, like, and so I was kind of surprised by that, but also like it's almost like this, the armor has some sort of authority to say, hey, this is okay, and we're not going to completely reject her, or and like, and even at the end of that, like Bo-Katan said this is the way, and like everyone agreed with that, and so there was like there's something going on in the background that is the armor's up to, or just knows other things, and yeah, it's interesting. I'm excited to see where they go, but yeah, I want to hear your guys' thoughts on this as well.
I mean, the familiarity thing, I hadn't considered that, but that's a very interesting idea. Dan, what do you think about all that stuff?
I would never say I trusted the armor. I'm never like, she's a nice person.
Yeah.
I would never go, because even like, we met her in the sewer. She's got a big hammer. She likes to beat people. We see in this episode she's very unusual weapons, I will say, but
that was a cool scene though.
Yeah,
her walk in there,
proper hammer time, and yeah. So I've never like gone, oh shit. I think the actress is phenomenal. Her voice and the cadence, the way she speaks, and again with a show where you're basically just wearing a fucking helmet for 3 seasons, you've got to have a good voice. You've got to convey all this emotion that your eyes, face, mouth, all this stuff isn't showing. And I think she's incredible. I think she's one of the best things in it. I always love hearing her say, this is the way. I was just like, yeah.
And all the different ways she says this is the way as well.
Yeah,
each time, and it's like, oh, what is this version saying?
Yeah, exactly. It's got slightly different meaning.
Like one of the last episodes when she was just kind of like, "This is the way," and it felt quite dismissive with the first when she was like,
this
"Oh yeah,
the way.
you've seen the Mythosaur, yeah, of course you have, Bo-Katan." It was quite a weird dismissive. This is the way. Kind of that's the end of the conversation.
Well, this is my issue with the episode. Like we have this big build. This whole episode is about whether the Mandalorian should help Greef Karga because they've been at odds before and they've inadvertently cost them some of their lives and some of their tribe, and Din Djarin's, he has that big, he does the big, he holds the hammer so he can talk, and he tells everybody, and then we get the heavy duty one, and he comes in, he's like, I don't like this guy, I never liked this guy. I'm like, oh yeah, fucking hell, we've heard this every episode out of your mouth, every fucking episode you're in. I don't trust him. No. And then it actually surprised me when no, we should join him. We should. I was like, I'm sorry. Like I was like genuinely like I was like, oh yeah, he sort of saved his son, but I did, the way he's still acting is still like, yeah, he might save my son, I appreciate it, but he's still not the guy I like. So the fact that he kind of turned around and goes, because we're Mandalorian, this is what we do, and and I quite enjoyed that kind of twist because I thought I would have seen that coming, but it did catch me off guard, and I was like, oh, okay, fair enough. And then there's this like, let's make a home for ourselves. Let's raise our children. Let's live in the light again. Let's do this. And again, we've got all this, and we got this is the way, this is the way, this is the way. And then we do this. We have the massive battle, the galleon. They bring the ship down. They save Nevarro. They are welcomed, and they are, all of the differences are put aside, and they are living there. They have found their home. They finally found their home. And then the armorer says, "Nah, let's go back to Mandalore." Like, I felt like it just cut away everything. I was like, oh, this will be interesting. Them living in the light, this warrior culture within this not so warrior society, but they're going. And then she's like, and also Bo-Katan learning, becoming and becoming indoctrinated into this, religious order. And she's like, well, now you can't take your helmet off, not in view of everybody else. And she's like, okay, fair enough, does all this. And then, don't worry about it. Take your helmet off. It's fine. Like, we spent all this time building to this and getting to this, and now we're just like, yeah, we're going to go to Mandalore. That just irritated me a little bit, because I'm just like, why build to this if you're immediately just going to throw it away?
Yeah, it's a good point. I think part of it is actually, I agree with you, but I think it's one of the reasons I don't trust the armorer that much, because the way the vibe I was getting was Bo-Katan is probably, I think Bo-Katan and Din seemingly the only two people who could probably fight as good as, if not better than the armorer. Bo-Katan is a natural leader. Her clan, House Cries, were in the Clone Wars, as you saw, Dan, because I don't want to spoil anything from Rebels and things, but it's like her clan were, her sister was the Duchess of Mandalore. So her clan were the most powerful Mandalorian clan for a period of time. And I think the armorer, to some degree, either feels threatened by Bo-Katan or something along those lines. And I feel like what the armorer kind of did initially in one of the other episodes was like, Mythosaur, yeah, you didn't see that, don't worry about it. And then she's kind of thought and gone, I can manipulate Bo-Katan because she thinks she's the one, but she isn't. I'm the one. So if I tell her to take her helmet off and she goes off and finds all these Mandalorians, she's going to get killed, or they're not going to believe her. It's one of those kind of things. It's kind of a trope in certain things, but when someone gives someone an impossible task and they're like, they're never going to come back from that. And then they come back and everyone's like, oh my God, you're the chosen one. Maybe that kind of vibe. And linking with something that Ike said as well, linking the almost the post-credit scene. I actually said to Megan in this, I was like, I feel like there's going to be a post-credit scene in this episode, and I don't know why. And then there wasn't a post-credit scene, but the ending thing felt like one. And when Carson Tevez finds in that shuttle, that Moff Gideon was in, that bit of Beskar, my initial, because me and Megan spoke about it a little bit, and we're like, what does that mean? And then I interpreted it as, there are several sects of the Mandalorian culture that survived. The Mandalorians were from Mandalore, but there were lots of other planets as well. Even Bo-Katan's on one as well, her little castle thing. So it's like, regardless of what happened in the Purge, the amount of Jedi that survived Order 66 is almost the amount of Mandalorians that are just in this set of episodes. So there's got to be more out there. So are the Mandalorians, like, is there a air quotes bad group of Mandalorians? The ones that worship Moff Gideon because he got the dark saber off Bo-Katan somehow, and they may have seen that as he's the rightful ruler of Mandalore. Who knows? There's also in history there have been Mandalorians that side with the Empire, but something with what you kind of said, Ike, it's made me really think, what if the armorer is the one who's orchestrating these Mandalorians who saved Gideon? It might be because it's one of those things where we're meant to think she's bad, and then it turns out she actually orchestrated this because she wanted Moff Gideon to have justice from the Mandalorians as opposed to the New Republic. That could be a bait and switch, or it could be she's doing some really dodgy stuff behind the scenes. And I suspect it'll be a mix. I suspect it'll be she does something bad with good intentions that does actually cause a lot of problems, but in the end, people are kind of going to see it. But I didn't know what you guys kind of thought of the armorer, like, as you said, Ike, maybe the armorer knows Bo-Katan. I think there is a familiarity there, but I wonder if it's more of a jealousy thing. I don't know if you want to develop more of that idea, Ike.
Yeah, definitely. I think it could be a jealousy thing as well, just because she has, like you said, like, it was interesting even an episode or two ago, like that we heard Bo-Katan mention her dad, and that was the first time we really get much mention of any of her clan outside of her and her sister, and so like that. So like I do wonder if there is a jealousy aspect to it. I've also wondered like I don't know. So, do we have a name for the armor besides the armor?
I don't think so.
Like, is this somebody
Tina.
who what
Tina.
He just says anything.
But like, I mean, like we've never seen her take her helmet off. Is this somebody from that we've seen on screen before? That is going by the armor and is kind of take leadership. I mean, that may be an out there idea. I don't know. Like,
it's a good idea. Though.
I mean, I think like because I mean, also I think it's interesting. Like, she has a different helmet. Like, she has like a gold helmet, which is different. She wears like furs, which we don't really see any other armor or any other Mandalorian do. And so like I do wonder if she has some sort of a connection to all this that we are going to learn about. Because I think I feel like there's going to be, because we keep every time like the armor makes like a best car armor of some sort, we always get a flashback, like almost always. Like, are we eventually going to get a flashback of her? Like, that's what I would love to see, and like getting a little more of that history. So, yeah, I definitely think there's some history, there's some jealousy, there's something there that, she knows more. I would assume she's one of the older ones in the group, even if, I mean, it's hard to know exactly, but I would think she's probably one of the older ones, and knows some things that that others don't.
I think Bo-Katan looks very good for her age.
Yeah,
she must be bloody.
I've heard a lot of people mention that.
Yeah. maybe that's what the armor is doing. She's keeping the helmet on because she doesn't want to be like take it off and be like, in comparison to Bo-Katan. I think you might have a point there because they do both talk about the Forge. They say, I remember the Forge on Mandalore. Yeah. It was, extravagant. It was this. And then she goes, oh, I remember it as well. So they must have both been in the vicinity or nearby or seen it. So, who's to say? Maybe there's... this might be, I don't know if this is a spoiler for me or for anybody else, but did we ever learn, oh no, I think I remember now. Does a certain character die? I think I'm going to say it. I'll say it. Spoilers, 1, 2, 3. Does Satine die in Clone Wars, the series?
Yeah.
I thought so. Yeah. I was going to say, maybe that's the twist, that she is, in fact... And well, I mean, we're talking about cloning, aren't we? So maybe there could be a clone of Satine, perhaps. Or,
that would be off the wall. Wow,
that would be immense. I mean,
that would catch me really off guard.
I don't think anyone would predict that.
Yeah, I don't know, because I don't know that much about. I know a little bit, but not as much as you guys and stuff.
There's not that much in the canon, to be honest. In Rebels, there's quite a bit, but Rebels kind of hyper focuses on Bo-Katan's clan and the character Sabine. One thing I criticize of Dave Filoni: why did you name Bo-Katan's sister Satine, and then you made one of the main characters in Rebels, who's a Mandalorian, called Sabine?
Yeah.
It's like, for God's, it's like in Game of Thrones, they've got Brun and Bran in the same series. I'm like, what are you doing?
It's also like Lord of the Rings. Sauron.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
There's lots of them, and it's so confusing. Sorry, Dan.
I want to ask about the Mythosaur thing as well, because the armor was talking about the Mythosaur obviously having, it's a special, it's the emblem of Mandalore. It's this, it's that. And I think, didn't they say that the original Mandalorian, back in the days, the olden times, that they conquered or rode the Mythosaur, or there was some sort of big part of that. Do we think maybe that the founder is looking to bring the Mythosaur under her will or kill the Mythosaur to show that she is the true leader of Mandalore? And I love that she was like, we're going to retake Mandalore. I was like, what is there to take? Something to retake?
Yeah, I mean, there's no one there. I mean,
I was like, there's weird spider cyborgs. You've got those strange cavemen, and then a Mythosaur that is massive, and you probably might not kill. Are we going to see the armorer, much like Boba Fett when he rode on the Rancor? He's going to ride in and just be like, "Yeah, Mythosaur."
Yeah,
I mean, I don't know.
I don't know. And I think the other thing that's interesting with that, and you brought that up, Dan, is like we also like, because I also get this impression that the Mythosaur was very like it was more legend than fact. Also from like some of the
I mean,
conversations we get.
it's in the name, isn't it?
Yeah, and so like
Oh,
I mean, but like it's this idea that like did they even know they actually existed? Like, was there a little bit of this, like, they didn't actually think they existed? It was just this kind of like legend that has developed over time. And I mean, and obviously they've taken that on as a symbol. And I mean, that's like when you see like the overall Mandalorian symbol, it's the Mythosaur. And so like, it's recognizable. But like, I do think there's this aspect of like, okay, if this is actually real, did our ancestors actually tame them and ride them or whatever? And so I think that is very, yeah, it'll be very interesting to see what happens with that because I think there is a sense of, and I wonder if that's also why Bo-Katan was so shocked. Is she's like, oh, I didn't even know this creature existed. Like it was actually a real thing, and so I think that's like that'll play into it as well. And I do wonder if you're right. It's like, okay, hey, if I can conquer the Mythosaur either by killing it or riding it or whatever, like, will that give me the um kind of that power over to say, hey, I can rule or have that extra weight and leadership in there.
It's very interesting because one thing I've just thought of, I think we're all kind of getting pieces of the puzzle here because it's very interesting when it's unraveling. Because if I make this assumption that maybe the Armorer couldn't defeat Bo-Katan in one-to-one combat for argument's sake, so if that is the case and the Armorer is trying to get power, the only other way the only trump card that would beat owning the Darksaber to rule Mandalore would be to be controlling this colossal mythological beast that's been either extinct for thousands of years or may have never even, it may be one of those things like dragons, for example. People in fantasy, people love dragons. It's always in Game of Thrones and Lord of the Rings and in a variety of different places. And it's like, in our culture, in the real world, dragons are a huge, like, everyone knows what a dragon is. But dragons, in theory, never existed. But it's so often in stories when you get, especially children who go into the land of Narnia, or, normally when you've got the normal air quotes character goes into this weird fantasy realm, they meet a dragon of some sort. And there's loads of different variations of what dragons are actually like and what they do if they talk, blah, blah, blah. But it's like, if someone in our real world went into this weird dimension and met a dragon, we'd know what it is immediately. But if we said, oh, I've went and saw a dragon, people would be like, you haven't seen a dragon, they don't even exist. And it's like, but no, but they've been in our culture for, you go back 10,000 years, it's still written in the scripture about dragons. Yeah, but they're just metaphors, or it was a really big iguana or something, or it was a crocodile. It's lots of things. So I think they're very interesting concepts. And I know in Legends there's a lot more information around it. I've not delved as deep into Legends. I'm only just kind of scratching the surface of Legends at the moment, so I know bits and pieces. But Legends, one of the messes with Legends is it goes back to, like, there's a Legend story about the beginning of time and how it all started. And, that's a bit too much for me. But, like, there is quite a lot of Mandalorian stuff in comics and things like that with Mandalorian culture. But yeah, the Mythosaurs, I think, in Legends did exist. But I think even in some of the Legend stories I've been listening to an audiobook that are set like 2,000 or 3,000 years before the Skywalker saga, even in those scenarios, people are saying, yeah, the Mythosaurs don't exist, or the Mythosaurs are this ancient being. So I think it's like, even in Legends continuity, I think it was tens, if not maybe hundreds of thousands of years prior to, like, the ancient ways of Mandalorian culture and things. And in Legends, there wasn't really... The Mandalorians we have now are different to those ones, because Mandalore the Great, I think he's called, the Darksaber guy, there was only a very short period of time where that was part of Legends, and before the Disney reset. Because I think that idea and that concept was kind of introduced in the Clone Wars. So Clone Wars only came out, less than 10 years before the Disney canon reset. So I think that's kind of a very good pocket that they're fitting into. But all very good ideas, very interesting. Is there anything else? I was going to delve into the strange bureaucracy of the New Republic, but is there anything else either of you want to add about Mythosaurs or Mandalorian before we delve into that?
I think one thing I want to add, one thing I've been hoping to see, and I think the Mythosaur kind of plays into this, but also is like in Legends we have what's called the Mask of Mandalore, and that idea is whoever has this mask and wears it is the leader of Mandalore, and kind of has that same vibe as the Darksaber. And so like I like is the Mythosaur kind of playing that role, or will play that role? And then also like, are we gonna get a Mask of Mandalore? Like I think that'd be super cool to see something of that nature that would solidify, because I think that and you mentioned that too, Mike, is like solidify somebody's leadership beyond just being able to beat somebody in combat. Because I think that's one thing is even if Bo-Katan or Din or they're the greatest one, there's gonna be some random Joe that from some clan that can probably beat them in combat. They may not have a brain on their head, but they can probably beat them in combat. And so like that can always change. But is there's something else, whether it's the Mythosaur or some sort of a mask or something that would add a sense of, hey, like this person is the leader of Mandalore. I think would be cool to see, but we'll see. I don't know.
It's a very good point, because I only knew about the Mask of Mandalore very recently because I listened to the Revan audiobook. And Revan is a very big character in the Knights of the Old Republic games and comics and things. I'd say he's probably the most famous Legends character and the most desired one to come into the canon. He's like the big one. In fact, they made a 3D model of him for the Clone Wars and didn't use him in that arc where Yoda goes to some Sith temples and things and sees like a ghost of Bane. And so I think in that story, there's a part where Revan basically defeated the person who had the Mask of Mandalore and just hid it, and then all of the Mandalorians just were infighting because no one could take up that leadership role, and it just it destroyed Mandalore for decades. Actually, in Legends, this is again that 3,000 years before the Skywalker saga, but that idea is very interesting, and I'd not even connected those dots, because that's a really good shout. And I wonder if they did do a mask, would the Mask of Mandalore, if they did in the canon, be like the first ever Mandalorian helmet? Because I'm intrigued. Like, why does this culture decide that? Was it just we're in war so much we always wear helmets so it protects us? But it seems like there's a specific design. They almost all have the line and the thing down, it's the T-shape. So it's like, I would really love to see a Mythosaur, the Mask of Mandalore, and the Darksaber being kind of like the holy trinity of Mandalorian culture. And the number 3 is something that is in a lot of in our real world, in a lot of religions. Number 3 is a indication of the whole. With Christianity as an example, you've got Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. It's like you've got the 3 realms of earth. You've got heaven, hell, and earth, or you've got heaven, hell, and purgatory. Like there's always 3. And so I think that idea, Ike, is a really good shout, and I hadn't really considered that. So I'd love to see that. And also, who doesn't I love in Star Wars seeing really old ancient artifacts that are really cool. I just love it. I love when you get sci-fi and it's like, here's loads of futuristic tech, but let's have some old futuristic tech. I adore that. So let's delve into the New Republic bureaucracy then. So the name, I had to look up this character's name because he's the head teacher, the principal in Mean Girls, because Megan was like, I recognize him. Who's he? And I was like looking on his IMDb page, and I was like, he voiced this character. I was like, oh, Mean Girls principal. She's like, that's where it is. So the character's name is Colonel Tuttle, and he's the person that Carson Teva, the New Republic pilot, he goes to him and says, look, I need some help with the Delphi squadron. We need to go and do this. Obviously, there was the Zeb cameo as well. But the bureaucracy of the Mandalorian, of the New Republic rather. Dan, what do you think about all this stuff?
It doesn't surprise me. Because, we got it a little bit in the other episode. I can't remember the episode's name, but it was the one on Coruscant. And we got the idea that, there's potential for technology, that things that the Empire developed, if we look at our own history, all the German rocket scientists were basically just employed by the US after the war because they were like,
to NASA,
you build really good rockets. We could do with some more rockets. So they went, let's do that. So in some ways, it kind of makes I kind of get behind the scientist and his cloning technology and stuff. I kind of understand why he would. Again, it's not my favorite episode, but I kind of understand and see why he would be led to do something like that. But yeah, I think it's because I think there's probably like you were saying, Mike, it's that we won. We can chill out now. But actually, no, it's not the fact. You can't rest on your laurels when you're a colony of hundreds and thousands of planets and systems and galaxies. It's not possible. You've got to keep on top of everything. And I think it's just like, we can't use that technology because it's imperial. Don't want to touch that, it's dirty. And it's like well, no, there might be something we can use. There might be something we can retroactively refit or reconstitute, or there might be a way of like the brainwashing device they had in that episode as well. It was like, oh, this is Imperial. It's I can't remember the name, but it's like basically just a white brain wipe
mind
machine.
flare or something like that.
Mind flare. Yeah, I think that was it. And it's like, no, it's, and the guy was like, no, it's fine. You won't feel a thing. I've had it done to me. I'm great. I was like, I thought that was quite funny. It's like, I don't know what you're worried about. It's fine. I've been through it.
You won't remember a thing.
You won't remember a thing. And he's like, yeah, it's fine. But I like that aspect that it's almost like the lunatics are in control of the asylum, but it's not. It's kind of like the pencil pushers, the bureaucracy, the kind of the yes men, and also the stuff are in charge. And I quite like it because, again, what you were saying about the rise of the First Order, it makes kind of sense that there would be this backlash. There would be this, and again, we're seeing that the former Imperials, obviously, they're like, they're like prisoners on parole, aren't they? So they're like, you do this job. We're not letting you touch anything that you used to work on. But you are here to do this. It's to serve the Republic. We know what you did. We appreciate what you did, and we appreciate you coming over and rehabilitating yourself. But there's certain things we can't have. There's certain things we can't do. And yeah, I like it. I really like it. I like seeing it's interesting when Star Wars fills in these holes, like you were saying, these gaps of time, these large gaps of time we don't know much about. Or I know the Bad Batch is doing something along the kind of lines of, I've not seen it, but I know someone mentioned it to me and said they're showing maybe why there were no more clones created potentially in the future, and that's always like, for me, I'd be like, well, just make more clones. You don't need to hire random dudes and pull them from planets. Just make more clones. Like, so I've always wanted a reason for that. I'd always wanted that whole filling in. So I always appreciate the fact that they're going, we didn't quite like that about that film. We didn't quite like this. We didn't quite like this. But how can we not fix that, but kind of maybe recontextualize it or approach it or make a story out of this? Like there's potential. There's never like there's like a saying where there's never a bad character. It's just bad writing. And I think the same can be said for these kind of plot holes, if you want to call them that, or vagueness. And I think Ike was saying right that there is a lot of loose ends, but they're on purpose. They're not. It's not loose ends where we're like, what's going on here? This is confusing. Why are we doing this? They're being planted there and placed there. And those characters are being placed there and planted there for a reason. And we know that eventually we're going to see these characters crop up, or they're going to have a more extended cameo or what have you. So I'm really enjoying filling in these holes and kind of going, oh, God, am I on the First Order's side? When did that happen? When did that happen? But yeah, I can kind of absolutely see. And again, I've been in office jobs and stuff, so I can relate to a lot of this kind of like, can't go there because they didn't do this and didn't cross the
tick the box.
Yeah. They didn't sign form. Oh, you've got the wrong form. You need, XYB form. You've got XYC. Sorry. So I quite appreciate that part of the episode. It's annoying, and I think they cast the right actor as well. I think he's great. Mm-hmm. He's in one of my favorite comedy films, which is the Dewey Walk Hard, the Dewey Cox Story, which is like a spoof on Johnny Cash, the Johnny Walk the Line, which is, I think, is hilarious and everyone should go watch. Our mutual friend Tony Farina loves it as well, and he's got good taste. So check that out if you've not seen it, with John C. Reilly. Anyway, yes, I like that. Long story short, I like this.
Nice. It's one of those things with the bureaucracy of it is, as you say, people get complacent when they're not in war. And that's kind of one of the things that I like about this element of the canon. And I know the difference here is what a lot of people a lot of people compare Star Wars. They go, oh, why can't we just keep Legends? Why do you have to redo it? Blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, look, you've got 40 years of Legends, you know, and that's fine. And I'm reading Legends at the moment. And it's like some of it you can just put in your own headcanon and go, yeah, that happened because it's 4,000 years ago and we haven't had any stories to contradict it. So who cares? But also, how many continuities are there of Marvel stuff, of DC stuff, of this? I know recently DC came out and said it's all canon. It's like saying that makes basically none of it canon, but whatever. Keep the fans happy, do what you want. But like, how many resets have we had? And like with Star Wars, you've just got the 2. And one of them, they literally call it Legends, which are very clever. It's like, this could have happened. This may or may not have happened. Who knows? It's a legend because it was thousands of years ago. How on earth? Oh yeah, I heard the legend that Kenobi did this on this planet. Yeah, but that contradicts what we saw in Kenobi. Yeah, but it's a legend. It's, you know, it's a mythos. So I like the fact we've got 2 continuities there. But in this one, they're like, okay, instead of just, which a lot of people want who hate the sequel trilogy, which I do not want, if them go, oh yeah, Kathleen Kennedy sucks. The Mandalorian is going to cancel out the sequel trilogy. Just like, no, they're not. Don't be so stupid. What they're doing is they're not retconning. They're doing what you're meant to do as a clever plot device. Is we're not going to go in and go, which is unfortunately what Rise of Skywalker did to Last Jedi, which annoyed me. They go, oh, so you know that line of dialogue and that whole build-up and the whole meaning of that film? We're just going to undo that for the sake of it for a villain. It's like, oh, come on. What they're really doing is going, okay, there are elements of this that may or may not have worked. There are questions. Let's develop that, as Dan said. Let's recontextualize that. Let's find out. Yeah. People are going, how come Palpatine came back? Why did it take him 30 years after dying? Why is he this weird, decrepit thing? Well, we're going to develop it. We're going to explore the cloning stuff in the Bad Batch to a degree. And there's touches of it in The Mandalorian and the Book of Boba Fett as well. There's bits sprinkled in. But we're going to recontextualize that. And I think the bureaucracy of that, I love it. And sorry, Ike, with you and the bureaucracy of the New Republic and things, what have you thought about it? How have you been thinking it connects? And I wondered, one thing I thought was the New Republic looks very similar to what Cyril had in Andor. When we saw him in that cubicle and stuff, it wasn't quite as big, but when he was just working in that crummy job and he was just in that Imperial place, I was like, there are vibes here that are connecting. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So Ike, I want to hear your thoughts on the New Republic's amazing bureaucracy.
Yeah, I completely agree with what you guys are saying as well. And like, I think it's interesting to see the connections, as you guys have said, like, okay, like the start of the Empire, the start of the New Republic, like seeing some of these connections. And I think like just even the fact that like the idea behind I think the contrast of like when we see the rebellion, like the idea is like with the rebellion, we're out to help people. We're out to save the galaxy from this evil tyranny. And like, but then like, as soon as they become established, like a switch flips of like, hey, we got to fill out these forms to save someone. And I think it's just like how that all plays out. I honestly, a couple things I've thought about is like, I think it's interesting that we've had the New Republic come into play, but never saw alongside Luke. So like Luke has not showed up like in context with the New Republic. He's always off doing his own thing, which I find interesting. And then also I really do think like I also think it's interesting. Like, so like from trying to think aftermath books, we know that Mon Mothma is Chancellor. At least initially. And so like also like are we gonna get are we gonna see a Mon Mothma Chancellor in the New Republic and see, yes, there you go. And like so I think just even some of those connections as well as like are we gonna see some of the higher up aspects of the New Republic? And I like honestly I really do wonder if we do see these, like is it gonna remind us a lot of episodes 1 to 3? What the Galactic Republic looked like before Order 66, before the Empire, and this like, hey, we need to do this. Nobody agrees, and somebody decides, hey, we're gonna do this, and then they tear everything apart. And so like I really do think that could be an aspect of it, and I think it's the idea that history repeats itself if you don't change it, and I feel like they're not changing it, at least not enough, and so. It's this, and I think Dan, you said it's like you get comfortable, like you won. What do we do now? And like they don't know what to do, and that sort of thing as well. And so I think it's interesting to see all of that kind of play together, come together. And like I said, I think I'm very intrigued to see like what are we gonna get from in the essence like I don't think we're going to get Luke and the New Republic really ever working together. He goes and does his own thing, and I think also just you guys mentioned Legends as well. Like we've seen things from Legends already that in Mandalorian, in the sense of like Dark Troopers aren't actually Legends. The Crate Dragon is Legends, and those sorts of things. And so like I do feel like we're gonna get this, like when you think about like Heir of the Jedi and some of those like Legends books that happened post Episode 6, I feel like we're gonna get some stories and things that come in that are similar to those, and recreating some of those things that happen.
Very good ideas there. Yeah, it's interesting. It's with the New Republic as well. It's kind of like it's doing all the things apart from the overt tyranny, the racism, and like the pure dictatorship of it. If you take away those atrocities, what you're left with is this ridiculous bureaucracy that's just reducing people's rights and things. And as you guys have pointed out, like the New Republic is basically doing that. And it's like, as you said, Ike, is like, oh yeah, we won the rebellion. Yeah. Well, now what? And it's like the rebellion don't actually know how to run a galaxy. And the problem is you had the Republic that had been there for, as far as we know, because in the canon it's a bit unclear, but it's about 1,000 years. The Republic is established for about 1,000 years. What it is in Legends is that 1,000 years ago was when the last great Jedi-Sith war was. I think before that it was constantly like a struggle of power. Sometimes the Sith were in power, sometimes the Jedi were. And then it's been 1,000 years where the Sith have gone. And so the Jedi became complacent, and so did the Republic. And now it's kind of like then they had 20 years of, or 23 or so years of horrendousness with the Empire. Then you had like a few years at the end in the Aftermath books, which is like, you know, the Emperor and Vader are dead, but the Rebellion and the Empire are still fighting. In Legends, it took like 10, 15 years, I think, for the New Republic to really get a stronghold on the galaxy. But in the canon, it's only a couple years. It's like a year and a half to 2 years. But it's like, oh, we won. Now what? It's kind of like us all talking about on a podcast, like how we'd like run the country. And then it'd be like waking up tomorrow and then suddenly being like the president or the prime minister and be like, no, I had like 3 good ideas, 2 of which were flushed out, and I could tell you 20 things to not do. But if you're going to ask me, how does like trading work with like Europe and economic trade, and how does like world economics work, and how does the value of pound, how does that change with what's going on in Europe and America? I'm like, I don't know. I just think that someone in power shouldn't be a dick. I just think people in power shouldn't be corrupt. But I don't have all the answers. And that's kind of, I think, what the rebellion's done.
Yeah. It's almost like when you've been rebelling for so long, how do you stop rebelling? Yeah. You know, that's all we know. All they know is rebelling. So it's like, oh, well, I don't like that. It should be run this way. And then it's like, all right, you've got it now. It's yours. What do you want to do? It's like, oh, well, I don't know how that works. I've never done this job. I've never, you know, I'm on the front lines. I'm fighting. And I think you'll find with that as well, like, I'm talking about Luke Skywalker not really working with the New Republic, but I think you find that the people leading rebellions or, you know, trying to work for this change don't actually run. They don't go, oh, well, I'm going to run it as well. I'm going to be the king. You know, it's very rare that I think you would see that in fiction or in real life. It's, you know, it's a kind of a wobbly ground, I think, to be a hero of a rebellion and also a political leader afterwards. I don't think it's worked very well out very well before, probably never since. But yeah, it was interesting. I'll tell you what, it was interesting. Again, I keep going back to this episode. I don't particularly like the episode, but the more I think about it, the more I'm like, actually, that is some quite interesting world building. When the clone doctor comes out of his speech and they're all like, and all the pompous rich people come across and they're like, oh, very good speech. I very much enjoyed it. Excellent. and then the one guy's like, you know, and he's talking about all the stuff. He's like, I never pay attention to the news. I don't know. And he basically says, they're all the same. He goes, the Empire, the first, you know, he doesn't mention the First Order, but the Empire, the Rebellion, you know, all this other stuff. He basically doesn't know the difference because he's just a rich asshole. You know, it doesn't matter because he's rich, he's privileged. He's at a point in privilege where he doesn't keep up with politics, doesn't keep up with it, but also like even the New Republic, the Blue Boys, don't know who they are yet. They haven't established themselves. They don't know what they're going to do. There's again, they're saying there's planets not linked to them in any way, and you would think, given the end or the special edition end of Return of the Jedi, that like every planet is united across the galaxy celebrating the end of the Empire, but that's not the case. There's all these outer rim planets and further, and some people again like Nevarro want to be independent, and there's a lot to kind of unpack there, and again the height of this bureaucracy being really poor is they don't guard Star Destroyers. They just leave them lying around. They're just like, no one's going to steal this. It'll be fine.
The Empire are gone. They can't. But we beat the Emperor, and we destroyed a few Star Destroyers on Jakku, and so the Empire are gone now, and that's the end of that.
Done. Yeah. Don't worry about it. It's Coruscant. It's Coruscant. I did quite like as well in Grogu's flashback in Coruscant. You see the Jedi drive past the top of the mountain of Coruscant, because obviously you see that in the previous episode. That was a really nice call that I liked.
Yeah,
again, not this episode, but I liked it.
Yeah, that was good.
It's one of those, and one thing, little note thing I've we'll start to wrap up. There's a couple more elements, but there's a thing I noticed, which was Colonel Tuttle, the bureaucracy guy. One thing I noticed, which they did very cleverly, and again, regardless of opinions on Star Wars shows or anything, the costume department is just phenomenal in every live action Star Wars show. It's been so good, so beyond like what one would expect from like a series that's not like a HBO style series. It's like they've really put the effort in. I really appreciate that. It makes you feel like you're in the world. And with Tuttle, he has a little insignia, which was it was a white square with 3 blue dots on it. And that's like, he's a New Republic. That's his rank in the New Republic. Well, in the Empire, they had that, but they had the strip. So there's a strip of, I think it's blue lines and then red on top of that. And the red is a higher thing. So if you've got 3 blues, but if you've got 3 blues and like 1 red, you're high, you know what I mean? And so you can see that in, especially, I think you'll see it in Andor, and you'll probably notice it more when I just watch Series 2 or you rewatch Andor, is the ISB. They've all got the strips and it says what rank you are. And there's just a little subtle thing where it's like, he's got a little rank thing as well. And it's like, there's all these little threads of like, this has got a lot of the rubbish things about the Empire, but not a lot of the air quotes good. It's like the Empire had a lot of faults. But when the Empire wanted to do something, they just did it. And it's one of those weird things where I do not believe that a dictatorship is the right way to run any civilization, But there is one argument that said for it, which is when you have a dictatorship, there's not really much bureaucracy. You've just got basically one person making all the decisions. If the Empire wants to blow up at Alderaan, he just tells someone they do it. In the New Republic, it's this constant, should we do this, should we do that? And the rebellion in Star Wars Rebels, they have this, there's an argument that happens in I won't say where it happens, but there's a point where a little rebel cell connects with some of the wider rebel cells. And one of the characters is like, has huge problems. He's like, I don't want to do this. He's like, we need to save these people. And they're like, no, but we need to check with the rest of the rebellion if we can. And he's like, I'm going there to save them because that's the right thing to do. I'm not waiting here for permission. This is why I didn't want to join a bigger rebellion. And you think, that's just like that's almost like a throwaway conversation in an episode. There is a theme that goes on throughout where that is in Rebels, but that's just a part of it. And you think, you scale that up to the whole galaxy, and that is what the New Republic is. And so I really enjoyed this, and I'm liking it. And I think that with Andor, Andor should stand by itself, so should The Mandalorian. But I think what Andor's doing is showing us ground level what it was like living in the Empire, both on Coruscant for an Imperial and for someone who's not an Imperial who's trying to fight it. You get the Mon Mothma side as well as Luthen Rael, but you also get obviously you got Andor side, but then you've also got Dedra Meero side as well. So you've got you seeing how it worked in the Empire, worked in air quotes, how that happened in the Empire, and now we're kind of seeing how it air quotes works in the New Republic. And I think they're cleverly, I think that although Andor and Mando, although they are separate, I think that you are kind of seeing a degree of convergence there. So is there anything else that either of you wanted to add before we kind of wrap things up? Anything that we either haven't mentioned or anything? I've got 2 more little notes, but Ike, is there anything else that you wanted to mention about this episode or anything else before we start to wrap up?
Yeah, well, one thing I was going to mention, and you guys kind of alluded to this, but like you have the rebellion, and these people who don't know anything but that, and like I just think it like, okay, you have Luke and Leia, they were born right when all this started. You have Ezra, who's born on Empire Day. You have, I mean, so you think of all these characters that we've seen fight the rebellion that don't have much memory of the Galactic Republic and prequels era. And so I think like just kind of adding on into that, it's like you have a lot of these people that end up being rebels, and you have some that don't, but you have a lot of people that are rebels that like that's all they ever knew was fighting. They grew up in that. And I mean, I think Andor even mentions like I think, and Cassian mentions in Rogue One, like, hey, I've been fighting the Empire since I was 6 years old or something along those lines. And so it is interesting, like Dan said, it's like those people struggle running a government and all they've known is, hey, who do we need to fight and rebel against?
That's a very good point. Yeah, I mean, because at this point, timeline-wise for people, so Order 66, The Rise of the Empire, that happened 19 years before the Battle of Yavin, which is A New Hope. And then A New Hope to Empire Strikes Back is 3 years, and then Empire Strikes Back to Return of the Jedi is 1 year. So it's 23 years after the rise of the Empire, when the Emperor and Vader die, and then the Battle of Jakku and that sort of stuff happens about 18 months after. So it's about 25 years from the rise of the Empire to essentially the fall of the Empire. It's about 25 years. Well, if you think, we're all similar-ish age, if you take 25 years off our ages, we're not really, and regardless of how our ages differences are, whatever age we were 25 years ago, we have no real understanding or comprehension of how an entire government is run. I barely know now, and let alone then when we were basically kids or younger. And you just think, it's a very good point, Ike, and I really hadn't considered this. It's like, even if you're alive, because the Clone Wars was 3 years before the rise of the Empire, so you're thinking, so you have to really be 28 years old at the time of The Mandalorian to have been born when the Clone Wars started. So realistically, you have to be mid-40s, realistically, to have even a vague idea of what the Republic was like, and then comparison to the rise of the Empire. So you're thinking, like, the only people who have any vague idea, really, of how the Republic was, and also, as Ike again pointed out, there's a reason the Republic fell in the prequel era, because it was being run terribly. That's how Palpatine rose to power. That was his main selling point in Phantom Menace. He was like, they're all corrupt. Chancellor Valorum's corrupt. He will not do anything because the bureaucrats who pay his bills, they're telling him not to do this, so he won't. And that's how Palpatine gets his way in. That's how he pushes, because he's like, I'm not corrupt. And in Legends and in canon, Palpatine was known as the Uncorruptible, because he had his own agenda, so no one could buy him out, because he knew what he was doing. He was doing the long game. But from the surface, he was uncorruptible, and that's how he won, because you're like, this whole government isn't working. I don't have an agenda. Trust me. And that's kind of almost with the New Republic, that's kind of what's happening, because, yeah, you have to be 45 years old or older to even be in the time where you vaguely remember how the Republic worked. And with, as you say, Luke and Leia and Ezra from Rebels and all these characters, like, none of them knew anything. They were just like, the Empire killing random people is really bad. We should stop that. And then you stop it and you go, well, we stopped the Empire killing random people. We've done it. And but that was a piece of the puzzle. They're a working government. Yeah, they were causing atrocities across the galaxy, but the main thing was with the Empire, as far as I can tell, is the main crux of it, although Andor shows they did these horrible things, the crux of the Empire was as soon as Palpatine made the Death Star, as soon as that happened, they lost. Because there are a lot of people who are rebelling in a lot of ways, and there's lots of little rebellions going on, but once there was a device that would blow up an entire planet, that's when the Empire lost any credibility. And it's one of those things where it was a working government. It wasn't. It was evil in air quotes, that sort of thing, and fascist. But it was like the galaxy was kind of still going on. So it's a really interesting concept there, Ike, that I really hadn't thought of. Dan, do you have anything to note on that element or anything else?
Yeah, I'm going back to like Obi-Wan. There was people, the average Joe, the average guy, that there was that mole character, that mole man in Obi-Wan who was like, I love the Empire. They gave me work, they gave me home, they gave me money, they gave me this. What's so bad about that? It's order to the chaos. They could have been in a bad spot or anything. So it's kind of, I like that they're playing with the complexity of it, because it's not obviously the Empire are space Nazis, but obviously we know in real life, it's not quite as clear cut as that. Whether obviously it's bad being a Nazi. obviously, but there were certain situations where people had to do certain things just to survive.
Mm-hmm.
So I find it really interesting to see. I'll go back to my least favorite episode, but the one I'm referencing the most. When the former Empire kind of refugees or rehabilitated Empire officers are talking about, they were like, he goes, what do you miss about the Empire? And he's like, I don't miss the Empire. The Empire was evil. It's bad. It's very, very bad. And they're like, no, just, the good stuff, like, the food, the transport, the little things, because they were like, it gave their life meaning, order, a purpose, and they're like, I miss the biscuits, I miss this, I miss that, I miss the long sleeps, the long flights, what have you, and I really like that they play with the idea that one bureaucracy is as bad as another, one government is as bad as another, and has potential to be just as bad. I also like what you were saying earlier, Mike, about those little visual nods to like future films and stuff. Like if we go back to like the prequel trilogy, we are looking at a lot of technology that would be repurposed into the Empire, like the clone troopers into stormtroopers, the Star Destroyers, all the ships and stuff. And it's quite interesting in that respect to look at it backwards to see, like, we're like, oh gosh, that's a Star Destroyer, even though the good guys are using it. That feels wrong. It feels weird. And then we know where we're heading. So it again, I feel like this is doing that. We know where we're going to go. And it's getting there. And you see these little, like, the costuming. You're like, oh, that's quite similar to the First Order, or I can see why their rank is quite similar, and the dots and everything you were talking about. So I do think we're seeing, the trajectory of where we're going to go into that kind of sequel trilogy, and I like that kind of. Again, it's like the visual language of the universe and the growth and the, I appreciate that on a world building level. So yeah, absolutely. Again, loving this. More power to the Mandalorian.
It's funny as well, because I've only just made another connection. I obviously said earlier that Mandalorian is connecting with Andor in a lot of ways, because we're seeing Coruscant at the ground level. We're seeing this, that, the other. Well, the Bad Batch, once again, I won't spoil anything, because there's a lot of people who listen to this who haven't seen the Bad Batch or anything like that. The Bad Batch is really showing how, because it's only set, I think season one's like direct, like the first episode is Order 66, so it's directly after. And season 2 of the Bad Batch, I think, is only a year or so after. So the Bad Batch is actually showing how the Republic transforms into the Empire, and you're seeing certain things of like an in-between the latest clone armor we saw and the Stormtrooper armor, and certain ships and things are like halfway between like an Arc fighter and a TIE fighter, and so the Bad Batch is showing how the Republic became the Empire. Andor is showing how the rebellion was brewed in the Empire and how it starts splintering it apart. And then Mandalorian, and whatever shows also come out of Mandalorian that span off that, is showing how the First Order grew inside the Republic, while also showing how the rebellion grows into the Republic. So I think for a while I was thinking, why are they airing Bad Batch and Mandalorian at the same time, all these things? And it's like, maybe it wasn't intentional, it just happens to be. But the 3 most recent pieces of content we've had, they all are showing transitions, the change in the galaxy. And it's a really interesting theme that's, when I started Series 3 of The Mandalorian, I didn't think that. I was like, oh, we're going to get more, Grogu and Mandalorian being quite cool, and maybe he's going to have a bit of a clash with Bo-Katan. That's going to be cool. That was it. And we're having this whole discussion where we're like the complexities of galactic governments and how things change. And it's like, it's so amazing when people talk, everyone knows I love Star Wars, and a lot of my friends who don't watch Star Wars, and they think it's quite shallow. They compare it a lot to the MCU. And I'm like, there are similarities, don't get me wrong. But I think when you really look at some of this stuff, like the MCU is crazy superheroes and magic and alternate realities, and it's all very cool, but it's very, in a lot of ways, it's very surface level. I enjoy it and I love it for what it is. But with Star Wars, the original trilogy at the core is social commentary on fascism and colonialism, and a lot of it is about how Britain worked and how America worked, and to some degree still do. and how that is a problem and what happens and how these governments get overturned. You know, there's space wizards and cool things exploding, you know, but there is context within it, social commentary. And I like how the new era of Star Wars is really touching a lot of those elements. So there's only a couple minor things I want to mention, which was one thing is, like I said, Zeb in live action. He's the big purple guy who spoke to Carson Teva. He is a Lasat, and a Lasat is actually made from concept art that Ralph McQuarrie made of the original trilogy, and it was originally what a Wookiee was going to be, like a Chewbacca. And a lot of characters in Rebels, in fact the whole crew, is based off this original concept art that Ralph McQuarrie made, which if people go and check out Star Wars Rebels Reviewed, my first episode on Season 1 of Star Wars Rebels, you should probably watch Star Wars Rebels to do that. In the video version of that, I show some of the artwork. But if you just type in Ralph McQuarrie concept art, people will see it. So Zeb in live action, I loved. I was thrilled by that. So that's one little thing. Another thing is the Kowakian monkey lizard warned the Mandalorians of the pirates around the corner. I just love that little bit. Just it was like they're like those creepy things that Salicious Crumb from Return of the Jedi. Yeah. When he's in the trees, they're a little point, and you're like, huh, and it just. That's just one of those, that's like a rebellion kind of thing. That's like when rebels go to a planet and the Empire invading and just some natural creature gives them a little nudge and a little hint. I liked that. And the other thing I liked was right at the very end, the not post-credits but post-credit scene, is that Carson Teva's droid R7, which I think is the most advanced R series we've seen, I think. I can't remember what they were in the sequel trilogy. They didn't really delve into technology or new ships or anything in the sequel trilogy. But R7, it's basically R2-D2, but he's got a little probe thing. Because it's the bit that stuck out of the Dagobah swamp from Empire Strikes Back. That gets detached and gets sent off. And I was like, that's just a really cool idea. I really liked that. So there were just a few little bits and pieces I want to throw out. Is there anything else either of you want to mention on either anything I've said or any last sort of thoughts on this episode or anything like that before we start to wrap up?
Ike? Did you have
I think one thing I was going to say is, and you mentioned the droid there, is how I can never think of his name, the New Republic pilot,
Carson Teva.
How he finds the Mandalorian covert is because of R5. Yeah, and I was like, oh, that was because he's like, yeah, I served with or you guys have a rebel that I served with or something. They all like looked at each other like, what? And then like R5 rolled out. I was like, okay, that's a pretty cool callback. And I thought that was a neat callback and a neat way they made that happen. And that sort of thing, which I thought was initially cool when Mando got R5 in episode 1 and all that. But yeah, I just thought that was a cool callback.
Yeah, it is. And for anyone who is unaware, R5 is the droid that almost got sold to Owen Lars in A New Hope, and then his regulator went up in smoke, and then they bought R2. And there's actually, in canon, there's a book called A Certain Point of View, and R2-D2 and R5 actually had a conversation, and R2 says to R5, I need to stick with this protocol droid. I've got something that I can't really talk about, but this is crucial to the rebellion. And R5 was like, but I want a home. I want to do something. I've been on the sandcrawler for ages. And R2's like, please, anything you can do. And then R5, it's very, very, very heavily insinuated that R5 intentionally blows up his own thing just so R2 can be with 3PO and go with Luke. So that's a little thing. That's like a deep cut, but...
So R5 saved the universe?
Pretty much.
Yep.
Pretty much. And it's funny.
That's what Star Wars sums down to, R5.
Yeah.
Gonna have like a badge or t-shirt. R5 saved everything.
Pretty much.
Proper chaos theory. The only thing you guys were talking about, the Beskar and Moff Gideon being taken. I think that's not. I don't think Mandalorians have done it. I think it's a frame job.
Okay.
Because within the show, within this episode, in fact, Din Djarin says, "Oh, we make ourselves very hard to find. No one will ever find us. We're the best at not being found. So why would they leave Beskar behind?" That's my thing.
That's a very good point.
They wouldn't leave any Beskar because it's precious to them. It's a religious artifact to them. It's personal. So why would they leave even a small sliver of it behind? I don't. And if we look at the Armorer and look at all these characters in the Mandalorian culture, no way. I think someone is actively working towards the Mandalorians and trying to get rid of them in some form. Whether it is actually Mandalorians that are, whether it's the Armorer planting that Beskar to frame other Mandalorians or something else, or maybe trying to get rid of Din Djarin or Bo-Katan. I don't know. But I guarantee that a Mandalorian would not have left that Beskar behind. Guaranteed. Last thing I'll say, what you were saying about social commentary is absolutely true, Mike, because the prequel trilogy was all about not the Trump administration, but the Bush administration. George Lucas was making a point about how poorly that's run. Why are we in Iraq? Why are we doing this? Why are we at war? This isn't the point. Just everything about that administration at the time, George Lucas was entirely against. And he was like, let's see all the political maneuvering in this film. Does it have any link to the George Bush administration? George Bush Jr., rather. Maybe so. So there's definitely, you are correct. There's definitely social commentary, weaved in throughout all of Star Wars, and and there's, it's bound to be. I think it's the same with any art form, but especially what you were saying before. Absolutely, but yeah,
very good point. And with your Mandalorian thing, I've just made another connection. Is I hadn't thought about that perspective, Dan, of someone's planting it for the Mandalorians, and I think probably it would be whatever's going to become the First Order. Because what's the best way, as shown in the prequels and things like that, with Palpatine, what's the best way to take over the galaxy? Where you get the two main factions, you cause them to fight a war, and then while they're busy doing that, you do all these things underneath it all, put all these threads while no one's paying attention, then you stop the war, and then all the threads are already there. And you've done that. So people are probably going to be like, well, the Mandalorian seems to be the only person who could beat Moff Gideon, and the Mandalorians, because they know that Bo-Katan is at least alive, so they're like, okay, how do we get this new republic to fight the Mandalorians? How do we cause more dissonance? The Empire destroyed, Mandalorian culture. They're trying to rebuild. What's the worst thing that could happen to them? The new government thinks they're causing problems, and they're the ones. So I think you're on the money there, Dan. I think that's a very, very good idea. And I just want to say, I'm going to share my screen quickly because I realised I was kind of being a bit of a dick by not looking up the Ralph McQuarrie concept art, making people check by the Rebels reviewed episode if they've not seen Star Wars Rebels. So I'm just going to share it with you guys right now. Okay. Here it is, and people on the video version of YouTube can see it. So this is one of the original pieces of Ralph McQuarrie's concept art for Star Wars. I've seen that, yeah. It's incredible. And the funny thing is there's a droid in Rebels called Chopper, and he's got a weird little arm thing like that R2 unit's got. Oh, yeah. And that thing in the middle is a Lasat. So, and also the funny thing in Rebels is that Lasats are often confused with Wookiees because the Lasat original concept art became Wookiees and things. And there's also a droid that pops up in Rebels that's a bit more similar to this protocol droid than 3PO kind of style protocol droid. But yeah, I always love to show people this because Rebels is, and I'll stop sharing this. So, but Rebels is one of those things where they use so much of the unused concept art to create new characters and things in there, and it's a little out of universe thing that I just adore. So I want to throw that in there too. But I think we've been chatting now for a long time, and I feel like if we don't wrap this up, we're gonna keep talking. It's almost been 2 hours, and talking to both of you has been incredible. It's such an amazing conversation to have on an episode. I was thinking, we'll talk about this episode for an hour or so. Easily could surpass 2 hours, but we'll start to wrap up here because it's just been such a good episode with so many deep dives in. So I really appreciate that. So we'll start with you, Spider Dan. Tell people any final thoughts and things, but also tell people where they can find you. I'll put links in the description, and we'll start to wrap up here.
I'm having a lot of fun with The Mandalorian and getting back into the Star Wars universe as well, like in a different format, in a different kind of style and take. As much as I loved Andor, I'm enjoying this on a different level. And Obi-Wan I enjoyed, again, not perfect, but also was a pretty solid show. So you can find me on all of the good internet places. In fact, right now, if you Google the word Spider-Dan, the first thing you'll see on Google is my website. Ba-ba-da.
That's amazing.
I know, it's great. It's
That
crazy.
is.
Don't ask me how it happened, but it's happened now.
It's your amazing content and all your big audience that's
There
always
you go.
following you.
There we are. I'm even above the famous guy who used to climb skyscrapers and stuff, Dan Goodwin. He was also known as Spider Dan because he's a climber, and he's awesome in his own right. But yeah, just in the last few days, it kind of I was the third ranking, and then I've jumped up 2 rankings for some reason. But there's some suggested videos and stuff. So if you just want to put in Spider-Dan, you'll see a lot of my stuff and all the links. The website's great. It's the hub for all the activity and all the links for all the social media, which is spiderdanandthesecretboars.com. That's BORES. But yeah, Mike's on there. He's done some shows. We've done shows together. We've done Disney discussions. We're going to be doing more of those. We talked about some Spider-Man comics, some Carnage stuff, some Venom stuff. And all the other great people from Comics in Motion and the Femon Collective and all the other amazing podcasts that we're connected to have all got their own little stuff going on. Highly recommend it. I'm on a newsletter from Paul. Super Dummy Paul has put a newsletter together. I, as much as possible, try and put content in, but sometimes it doesn't happen. And so check that out. Again, that will keep you up to date on what we're all doing, what's coming next. My last episode had me, Tonya, and Rhea on talking about some vampire films. We were comparing the 2 vampire films, and I think we're going to just next time they're on, we're just going to continually do vampire content because that's seemingly what they want to do. We've heard, some other people are like, I'd be up for that. So I'm like, yeah, sure. So we're going to be doing more vampire content when we're together because Tonya said I'm not allowed to do it with anyone else. So that's it. Have to do it with her now.
Well, make sure you do Daybreakers then, because Daybreakers is my favorite vampire film, and it's so weird and different to any other vampire film, and a lot of people hate it.
It is weird and different.
Willem Dafoe's not great in it, I will say. He's like, there's a guy who's Southern. Let's do every line of dialogue that comes out of his mouth some sort of reference to barbecuing. It's like, okay, that's terrible, but the concept. The concept is brilliant.
The stuff I like about it. I thought the curing of the vampires was very convoluted.
It's a bit weak. But the idea of a society almost purely of vampires, I love that idea. I think the idea carries the film probably better than the film does.
Well, there's many films out there where the concept, you're like, this concept is great. This is great. The idea is great. But then the film is like, you're like, oh, they had a good idea, they just didn't follow up with a good script. But there you are. But spiderdanandthesecretboars.com, check it out. There'll be more stuff coming up, some really good stuff, and Mike will be on very soon as well. We've got a very weird film from what I imagine that we're going to talk about.
Yes, and that's going to be in person as well, so you're going to come down, live. Stay with me and Megan for a little while. And we're going to watch a couple of really bizarre movies. One of them is the weirdest movie I've ever seen in my life. I think it's going to compete with the other 2 weird films that you've had on. It's not like Cannibal Holocaust. It's not got there's no horrendous, brutal murder animal scene, thank God. But there's a lot of weirdness.
I did warn people about that one. I was like,
I can't even tell Megan what animal gets killed in that because she would get upset just knowing.
Yeah, it was not an easy watch. I'm glad I did it in historical context, but it's not a film I will go back to anytime soon. But there you are.
But on a lighter note, your content, tell us how people find you, 1 or 2 of your most recent episodes, what you got coming up. Just plug yourself.
Yeah. So first off, I agree with Spider Dan. I loved his theory that somebody is framing the Mandalorian, so I think that's going to happen. And also, I'm going to throw this out here. Just
do it.
No context. Well, maybe some context, but no thoughts afterwards. I'll let you guys think on it. But I have wondered, and I threw this out. I was talking to my brother. I think in an episode probably back in February there, but we were talking about how I would wonder if we're going to get Admiral Pride or somebody like that show up in one of these that has connection from the Empire to the First Order and kind of thread all that together. So I think that'd be cool. I don't know if that'll happen, but
good job.
Or that's who Moff Gideon is answering to, or something along those lines. So just throw that out there. But yeah, you guys can find me, Xflame, a Star Wars Story, on Instagram, TikTok, anywhere you guys find podcasts. We're hanging out. And we love to connect with you guys, talk Star Wars. Like I said, we do a lot of deep dives. Actually, since Bad Batch and Mandalorian, we've been doing episode reviews, which is actually the first time I've done episode reviews on my podcast. So that's been a little bit different change of pace, which has been fun. And also, we're coming up on a year of my podcast, so that's super exciting. We did episode 50 a couple weeks ago with my brother. We just basically all we did was we ranked our top 50 Star Wars characters between two of us, and that was a lot of fun. So we're doing that. So here in the coming weeks, next week we'll have Bad Batch season in review, and then we got Mandalorian review coming up as well. And so a lot of fun stuff. And then definitely between shows we do a lot of deep dives into Star Wars characters, whether that's Thrawn and others. So and try to do the best we can to connect it to current things coming out as well. So so that's Ike's Flame, a Star Wars story, and as I said, TikTok, Instagram, you guys can find us.
Absolutely amazing. Yeah, I would recommend people check it out. And it's one of those shows where it's incredible kudos for doing this for a year. Me and Dan are old men when it comes to podcasting, because I think we've both, you and I have been doing it for almost the same amount of time, haven't we?
I think so.
I'm coming up for 6 years in September. I'm
5 years in November.
Yeah, so it's only a little difference. You add your two together and you get me. Yay! Not in real life. Both of your content is both incredible in different ways, but really, really great. So anyone who's listening to this podcast, if you enjoyed this and you see the kind of conversations that we have, the three of us together, and the kind of ideas that come from these two, just check out the podcast. And Ike's Flame is a great one where you can go back to episode 1 and kind of go from there. And you see how, you grow as a podcaster and things, because as we all do, I tell people not to go back and listen to episode 1 of me. Like, great idea, great concept. Like, you listen to episode 1 and it was like, should you ever punch a Nazi? And it's like, that's a great concept. And the show is not bad by any stretch, but you just hear the difference of how I was back then and how long it's taken me to get used to stop interrupting my guests and waffling at the start for like 40 minutes before getting to the point.
I don't know. I kind of disagree with that, Mike. I really enjoyed when you would just openly just burp and leave it in your podcast. That was one of my favorite things.
It's horrible, isn't it?
It's just like, anyway.
Because I just took no notes at any point of just like, I should edit this. I was like, I'll just put it together. This is just a tester thing for me for a little while, see how I feel. And now I'm like, nearly 6 years later, and it's like listening back to like episode 15 where I speak for 8 minutes before the episode even starts to tell you what happens in the episode. And I'm like, why did I do that? Friends of mine told me, why are you doing this? Tony said, your intros are a bit long. I was like, no, they're meant to be that way. And he was like, okay, you do you. And I was like, I should have listened to him. Why? He's being so polite. He's being so polite about it. But realistically, he was saying, Mike, they're a bit long. And if Tony's being kind, saying they're a bit long, it's someone else going, Chloe, just shorten them, you dick. So it took me years to figure that out. But with Ike, you don't have such a... With me and Dan, we were in like we were doing... I haven't listened to Dan's earliest episode, so I can't comment. It's only because you said it, Dan, about yourself. But for me, I'm like, you can go back and listen to the old episodes. Probably start at the new stuff and work your way back. Don't start at the start. Ike, however, start at the start and go through, because there's so many characters and cool things he develops, and his early stuff is not as rough as mine is. So please go for that. Check out both Dan and Ike's podcasts, because they are both fantastic, and listen to them and leave reviews for them on Spotify. Awesome. Or rate them on Spotify and leave reviews for them on Apple Podcasts, Good Pods. Share the love, make connections and things, because that's part of the reason I love doing these discussion shows, is just trying to get cool people together to talk about, obviously Star Wars, the thing I love, but also the other things that come to it. So just thank you both so much for being on the show. You can find me at Genuine Chit-Chat on Instagram, Twitter, and on Facebook. And Genuine Chit-Chat is on every podcast app, I think, most of them at very least. And my show, Star Wars Comics in Canon. You never have to have read a Star Wars comic in your entire life to enjoy the show. I go through the plot details, and I go through many connections along the way of characters that reappear and other content that it connects to, those sorts of things. So please go check that out. And next week, I'm going to be at Star Wars Celebration. So next week, myself and Megan are going to be recording in a hotel room, just the two of us. I don't even know if there's going to be video or not, because we'll figure that out. But I will be doing sort of, after each day, I'm going to be doing a bit of recording and just talking about the kind of stuff I went through in the day. So it's a nice little bonus to what people usually get, and this Mandalorian episode as well that will be, out for everyone to listen to, and myself and Megan will be doing one. But thank you both so much for joining me on this journey. One of the best discussion episodes I've done ever of the Star Wars stuff from Andor, Series 2 of Mandalorian, the Kenobi stuff, Book of Boba Fett. This was an incredible deep dive, and it's going to be hard to top that next week with me and Megan. So, and she doesn't listen to these, so she's not going to know that I said that.
I personally think the Megan podcasts are the best ones. So
a lot of people say that. That's why I've kept most of our podcasts together, just to Patreon, because people are like, I love hearing from Megan, I want more. So yeah, you got to pay for that, I'm afraid, friends. She comes in the Disney discussions, which you get like once every few months, and that's it. It's like you need to put her behind a paywall. But friends, thank you, everyone. Thank you for listening. I appreciate you. But Dan and Ike, thank you so much for making the time, especially chatting with me for 2 hours. It's been an absolute delight. So just thank you so much. Thank you for the listeners, and as always, may the Force be with you.